That's it. That's good. No, I get on. My name's David Monias. I am the Chief of the Nation for Nisichawayasihk, also known as Cross Lake, Band of Indians. I just wanted to introduce Kevin Hart. He's been with the AFN Manitoba Regional Chief for 6 years. And I've known Kevin for quite a while. He used to work with us at Manitoba Regional Chief as one of our technicians and political advisors to the Grand Chief at that time. And he was also an experienced advisor in the provincial Manitoba Legislative Assembly. So he comes with some experience in the provincial system, governance system, as well as in our Indigenous provincial territorial organization. And well versed in First Nations issues, well versed in the disparaging and also the emerging issues that continue to plague our people. Like, for instance, like he worked on homelessness for our people who worked with us on that, and for people in Winnipeg, not just in the community, but also in off-reserve urban areas. And he was also one of the people that we counted on to work with us with a team on First Nations policing when we were trying to develop our policing. So he did a lot of political advocacy and did a lot of analyzing the policies that were out there, and brought that knowledge back to the Grand Chief and also to the chiefs in the Northern Manitoba, and also to myself as the executive director at that time. So I'm well versed in terms of his ability, his skills that he can do. I think, he brought a lot of money to Manitoba as a portfolio holder for the AFN Assembly as a regional chief. He worked in the things that we worked on was child welfare, Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, Jordan's Principles, social development, murder and missing women, housing. So all these experiences that he has, I think that would, he's been able to acquire that experience for him to be able to have the ability to carry a secretariat like Assembly of First Nations. While he does know that the AFN is not a rights holder, he doesn't forget that who he reports to and who he's accountable to. For myself, as a First Nations and also as an Indigenous leader, we had a lot of conversations in terms of what was available for our community, and he was able to communicate with me quite a bit, and I'm sure that he can do the same thing for the rest of Canada, Canadian Indigenous leaders. So to me, I think that Kevin's the right candidate for the Assembly of First Nations National Chief. He's a workhorse. He works hard. He has really good support at home. I give credit to his wife because, how can you have somebody sell or pawn their engagement ring to support his husband to be able to travel and go somewhere to do his work? His wife told a story that she had to wake him up in the middle of the night to come to bed because he's 3 o'clock in the morning, he's still working. So I think that he's a hardworking man. He's a father, and he's also a husband. And North Manitoba man for me, I think it's really good virtues. We're all North Manitobas. So good men there and good women. But anyways, I just want to say, vote for Kevin Hart. Thank you very much. I'm signing and ask him today. Go ahead, Chief Miracle.
Good evening, everyone. I bring greetings and wish to thank our National Chief, Perry Bellegarde, for all of his years of service and for all the work that he's done, and wish him my very best wishes in his future endeavors. Bring greetings to the chiefs, the proxies, the elders, our First Nation citizens, our young people, and all the AFN staff and those who work in our PTO officers in our regions. I have the great honor to second the nomination of Kevin Hart for the position of National Chief. I worked with Kevin on the Chiefs Committee on Housing, Water, and Infrastructure, and have always been impressed with his grassroots leadership style. He's always been very prompt and courteous. He gets along well with others. He adds humor to the meetings, and he's very dedicated to the work that he does. Kevin Hart is a compassionate, dedicated, passionate, determined, and experienced leader with the many facets of experience that are needed now to address the many issues that our communities are faced with. He's committed to getting results on the current issues that face so many of our First Nations citizens in Canada today. Kevin has 25 years of political experience, and he knows how laws and policies are made because he's worked for a cabinet minister as an assistant in the Manitoba Legislature. In his work as regional chief, Kevin has worked tirelessly and has been a strong advocate for housing, water, infrastructure, social development, child welfare, Jordan's Principle, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. He's worked with Transport Canada and the Canada Emergency Management. He's worked with the Women's Council and worked with on the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Kevin knows only too well the impacts of colonialism. He understands the issues that face our people that stem from racism, neglect, and poverty. He understands the impact of climate change, the fires, the floods that have damaged so many homes, community infrastructure, and lives in our First Nations. Kevin has been a tireless advocate, working to get our First Nations the infrastructure that they so desperately need. As the chair of the AFN Chiefs Committee on Housing, Water, and Infrastructure, Kevin has championed a $6 billion in new investments in budget 2021, $4.3 billion for water and infrastructure, and $1.7 billion for ongoing operation and maintenance over 5 years. Kevin recognizes that the COVID-19 impact has impacted the cost of building homes in our community, and that many of our young people and community members will be challenged in affordability to find shelter and build homes that are so desperately needed. As well as his political experience, importantly, Kevin has experienced poverty. He currently is homeless after his home burned down. 4 days later, he was advocating for the things that our people need in our communities. He's a residential school survivor. He's well grounded in the Indigenous culture, and he understands the First Nations struggles for access to basic necessities of life, such as shelter, safe drinking water, and most importantly, he understands the necessity of keeping First Nations children at home with their families. I believe Kevin will be an informed, strong advocate, always keeping our issues in the forefront of the ministers to get the resources that are so desperately needed to close the gap, to improve the quality of life, and to have our rights recognized and implemented. Kevin is committed to getting results and the investments to meet the priorities that the chief set and those of our First Nations communities. And I'm honored to second his nomination for the position of National Chief. And I ask for your support for Kevin as National Chief in the election. Goa.
I want to bring greetings to you from the beautiful Treaty 1 territory here on the Saugeen First Nation. I want to first acknowledge the protocol for First Nation, as well as the prayers that were offered up this morning. I bring you greetings as the former regional chief for the Assembly of First Nations for Manitoba. First off, I want to raise my hands up to our relatives in BC, namely our relatives in the Kamloops, as well as across the country, we see the finding of the unmarked graves and our little ones that have been affected by a genocidal system that impacted us as First Nations since we first made contact, since colonialism has been created and passed down upon us. For the work that I've done in the past 25 years, I've reached out to try and break down barriers for us as First Nations people, both working and breaking down these barriers to be able to work directly in provincial governments as a minister assistant at the highest level, where we learned how legislation, laws, and policies affect us and how governments work each and every day. We all know leaders, chiefs, cook bees across this country right now that our rights are being violated each and every day. That governments do not have the best interests of First Nations at the tables. You know, these are benchmarks I want to raise as your next national chief to ensure that the voices for you as the leaders of the day are heard at each and every level, whether it's at the municipal government, whether it's at the provincial government, whether it's at the federal government. This notion of delegated authority has to stop. Our sovereignty and jurisdiction is being violated every day. I've seen it fighting the Canadian government when we fight for our children at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. I've seen it fighting for our children in child welfare, where our children have been commodified, they've been forgotten about. We see this happening now during this pandemic, where we have such a huge homelessness situation in our urban centers. We have an opioid crisis, and it seems that governments and people just do not care about our people. I want to be that strong voice that's going to ensure that I fight for our children and I fight for our most precious resource, our knowledge keepers, our women, and overall us as nations. My work in breaking down those barriers, and when I see the leadership in the time in the last month that I spent campaigning, you know, everybody's talking about this pandemic and how it's affected everybody. You know, first off, I want to state that I offer my prayers up to each and every family that's lost a loved one during this time. I want to lift up my hands to all the leadership across this country for keeping everyone safe and letting me know when I was the co-chair of the COVID-19 task force, the needs-based funding, the resources and the investments we needed in our First Nation to keep our people protected. We argued at the time when the federal government did not even have a pandemic plan in place to protect our people. We argued and advocated for that. We argued for every resource and investment to keep our people safe. My work, working with chiefs from coast to coast to coast, has brought results to every First Nation. Whether we look at the investments in early learning and childcare, our most precious resource, our children, we've been able to manage to bring $3.5 billion to the table over the next 10 years. That's going to help our children both on reserve and in our urban centers. We know the struggles each and every day for us as parents when we're out there trying to find proper childcare because, you know, we want to work and make a living. We always want to make sure that we secure a future for our women and our children. That's something that I want to ensure in my first mandate for you as your national chief, that in my first 100 days that I have an action plan that's ready, that's going to talk about everything that we're talking about right now. There's a lot of issues going forward when we look at those very bottom line benchmarks that chiefs are looking for right now. We're looking at the pandemic recovery, of course, as well as the reopening. We need much needed resources and investments. And that's what I'm hearing right now from chiefs. You know, how are we going to do that? And at the same time, they're looking for a leader and a national chief to provide some continuity, as well as to ensure that they're going to be there to fight right as day one when they're sworn in that they're going to be there to help each and every First Nation in this country. I've been able, with the 12 portfolios I've held, in the most humble and honorable way on behalf of chiefs here across the country from coast to coast to coast, we have been able to accomplish much, chiefs. There's a lot that needs to be done. I want to continue to fight for our children. I want to continue to fight for those children found in those unmarked graves. I want to continue to fight and find justice for our survivors that are out there right now and bring those people to ensure that we look after them and we take care of them, that they get all the necessary supports in place. And for myself, in my first 100 days of my action plan, we're going to look at those very things that affect us each and every day, whether it's from the issues that affect us when we look at our communities, such as the LGBTQIA2S. They're screaming out there to look for acknowledgement in that. I want you to all know I love you, I hear you, and I see you. I want to work with you, and I want to hear from you. To the leadership across the country that are looking for continuity and such, you know, I just want to say to you that it is with great humility that I've been approached by First Nations and, you know, consulted with our knowledge keepers and such, and our elders and my family and of close friends and such. You know, I formally announced my intention to be your national chief, and I think that I bring a wealth of experience because I've worked with the national chief, I've worked with regional chiefs across this country on some of the most critical issues that affect us as First Nations each and every day. I've been there to ensure that we fight for those necessary investments for safe shelters for our women. When I heard from women leadership, when I held the women's portfolio, as well as looking at the families and that I met in such a most tragic circumstances, I met such loving, beautiful people that are looking for answers and looking for justice to find and bring their loved ones home. That's the same thing and the same fight that I want to do when we talk about C-92. The work that was created there in the co-drafting of C-92, as well as working with Marianne Ellen Turpel-Lafon. My hands up are going up to Cowessess First Nation, as well as Chief Cadmus Delorme, and them reaching that final day today to say, yes, we have laws that talk about the sovereignty and jurisdiction of our children, and that we're going to bring them home according to how our customs, protocols, and traditions are. You know, we look at the rights in the many jurisdictions that First Nations fully recognize and how they're respected and honored. You know, in working with the leadership across this country, as well as my knowledge, when we look at the governments and that, I want to make sure that we bring forward that, and that, you know, our sovereignty, our treaty rights are violated daily by governments while they continue to implement extinguishment policies and maneuvers through acts and legislation that continue to not show the best interests of our lands and our waters and resources. My approach with other governments is to be clear and unwavering, to support the advancement of inherent rights and treaty enforcement as we assert our sovereignty and jurisdictions. My work to you as your next national chief, I'll work as a strong First Nations advocate to ensure that your jurisdictions, your authorities, your treaties, and your Indigenous laws are respected each and every day. You know, I'm determined that we drive these priorities as bottom line benchmarks. We need that. We have to continue to fight for each and every inch that we have nowadays. In all provincial and national forums, it will be a clear understanding that the path, priorities, and declarations of First Nation leaders and their people must be represented and understood from each and every level. That's my focus. You know, we've been talking, chiefs, across this country for many decades, and I want to acknowledge everyone that has laid that path, our past knowledge keepers and our leaders. You know, it's a time that we've always talked about getting to one day. Well, chiefs, I'm here now. I'm ready to walk with you now. Let's get started on day one. I look forward to the vote tomorrow, and I encourage you to vote for myself to be your next national chief, because I'll ensure to fight for our women. I'll ensure to fight for our children, and I'll ensure to make sure that your voices are heard at each and every table
and we'll make sure that we knock down those doors together. Thank you very much. Igosani Matakyapi.